If you're made to feel bad about yourself from someone who says they love you, visit loveandabuse.com and download the Mean Workbook today. Some behaviors aren't healthy, and it's important for you to know what those behaviors are. Are you annoyed by affirmations? Are you tired of that same old, rehashed personal growth advice that all seems to boil down to, think positively and all your problems will go away? If affirmations feel like lies and positive thinking feels like denial, then I want you to get ready. The Overwhelmed Brain is here to help you create the life you want now. Hello and welcome to The Overwhelmed Brain. My name is Paul Coliani and I am here to help you tackle life's toughest challenges. I want to help you increase your emotional intelligence, strengthen your self-worth and self-esteem, and empower you so that you can make decisions that are right for you. Everything I talk about on this show is my personal opinion and is meant for informational and educational purposes only. Always consult a medical or psychological professional before making any changes that could affect your physical or mental health. All right, I want to help you maybe clear your conscience. I've been thinking about getting rid of old baggage, getting rid of old guilt, getting rid of things that you just feel bad about. And before we go on that little journey, I don't want you to believe that you'll ever stop feeling bad about something. That's terrible for me to say. But there are some things we do in life that we feel bad about and will probably continue to feel bad about until they either disappear on their own or not. I mean, that's how I feel about it. It's just some things that you've done in your life or that have happened, you're going to feel bad about. And when you think of September 11th, 2001, do you feel bad about it? I mean, some people don't think about it at all. Some people think about it all the time. Some people have bumper stickers. What feelings come up for you when you think of something bad in your life? And that was kind of a global thing, even though it was in the U.S., but it was really worldwide. It affected the entire world. But what happened in your life? Like when I was taking my training in Arizona, I remember someone shared something with me that she, let's just say that she killed her dogs and she didn't mean to. It was a complete accident. And when she started telling me the story, she cried. You could tell that this is something that was fresh on her mind all the time. She felt bad, but she also felt guilty. It was weighing down on her. It was weighing on her conscience, and she couldn't get rid of it. And she felt like she needed to own it. She felt like that if she were able to heal from it, then maybe that was telling herself, the universe, God, that it was okay that it happened. And so she chose to own it. She wanted to, well, I don't think she wanted to, but I don't think she wanted to let it go, because letting it go meant, like I just said, that meant maybe that it was okay. And if it was okay, then the act was okay. The event was okay. And she didn't like that. She didn't like that feeling of it being okay. She wanted to make sure that she felt bad about it and guilty about it for the rest of her life. Now, I'm making some assumptions here because she didn't use those words, but we can probably all relate to this. I know I can relate to this. I can picture these things that I've done in my life, the stuff I did to some family members, the things I said, the things I did. I've talked about on my show before, bringing my cats to the kill shelter. You know, I don't know if they ever got adopted, so I had this guilt come up. And what I did with that to get me past the guilt has worked with almost anything in my life. And I've shared this on other episodes where I talk about what to do with guilt. So if you have some strong guilt in your life about anything, or even minor guilt, check out those episodes. Go to theoverwhelmedbrain.com, type in the word guilt. You're going to have all kinds of references that come up, and hopefully that'll help. Today is going to be very similar. Today, at least in this segment, I want to talk about clearing your conscience when something is weighing on it. For example, I received an email from someone who said, I think I might have been the emotionally abusive one in the relationship. I left my husband many years ago, and he was aggressive, and he did this and he did that, and I was scared, and all I was trying to do was get away from him. Yet here I am with this guilt many, many, many years later, and I can't have a normal relationship because of it. What do I do to get past it? What if I really was the abusive one? And I read this, I was thinking, several years. She's almost like 10 years past this relationship, and she still has these guilty feelings about her past. I understand this. When I was in a relationship, I was the emotionally abusive one. I was that person. And, emotional abuse has a lot of definitions, a lot of factors, but let me just narrow down what I did. I was highly judgmental. I gave my wife the silent treatment. I made sure she felt bad about herself, her eating habits. I made sure that she knew that I was unhappy with the way she looked, her appearance. And as I've said before, I'm not proud of that at all, but I have moved past the guilt because it's important that I live my life in a healed way. Doesn't mean I don't feel bad about how I treated her and what she had to go through with me. But what it allowed me to do is become a better person, not only for me, but for her and anyone else in my life, anyone else that comes into my life. You have to heal from guilt. That's a bold statement because there are some things that maybe you've done in your life that maybe still carry some guilt. If those things carry some guilt, it is time to move past it. Yes, how do you do that? What's the trick? What do I do? What I did was come up with I don't know what you call it, a process. I came up with a plan for my guilt. And that plan was to ask myself, is there anything I can do to make up for how I treated that person? And if the answer is no, then all I can do is apologize and say, you know what? I screwed up. I was rotten. This is what I did. I am so sorry. And just throw that apology at them, not expecting forgiveness, not expecting acknowledgement, just saying my part, but also making a commitment inside of me that says I will never, ever do that again to that person or anyone else, ever. And that commitment has to be so powerful that it drives your behavior, all of it. This person who wrote to me, if you think that you were emotionally abusive to your ex, you make a promise to yourself that you will never, ever be emotionally abusive to anyone else, ever again. That doesn't mean you're going to succeed. It just means you're going to declare it. You're going to create this principle inside of you that you follow. You're going to make it happen inside of you, because that's where your world begins and ends, inside of you. Make that declaration. I will never, ever treat anyone like that again. Because what'll happen is as that old behavior comes up, you're going to question it. This is what happened in my relationship, or happens now in my relationship, is that when old behavior springs up inside of me, old judgments, the thought of being silent, of moping or sulking, the things I used to do to make her feel bad about herself, my wife when I was married, if that comes up in this current relationship and I feel like I want to do that, I have to step back and go, whoa, what am I doing? Is this part of my old behavior? This is a lot of self-discipline. It's difficult because you want to fall back into those old behaviors. And is this behavior healthy? Is this supporting my partner's happiness? In relationships, those are the kinds of questions that when we ask ourselves, we actually can come up with some different behavior. Because if I ask myself, does this support my partner's happiness? I have to then reassess what I'm doing and perhaps change my behavior, which usually involves how can I say it? A kick in the ego's crotch. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind, is that it's very difficult to go along a path knowing that, hey, this old behavior worked the way it worked, and I want to make sure that I say what I want to say and be heard, and I want what I want. There's a part of me that wants what I want, or a big part of me, and probably a big part of all of us that want what we want. And when it doesn't happen, what do? We fall on behaviors that help us get what we want sometimes, or we've expanded, evolved into a place where we go, hey, I can't always get what I want. I'll try it, but if it doesn't work, then I move on. That's a fairly non-suffering place to be. A little bit of suffering because you want what you want, but you get into this non-suffering space of, hey, if I don't get it, that's fine. I can move beyond this. This isn't the most important thing in the world. This isn't going to define my happiness for the rest of my life. A lot of this is just fleeting stuff. I want that big screen TV. Well, if I don't get it, how bad is that? That's just a minor example again, but this is what we do to ourselves. We set ourselves up for these expectations, these wants. We want what we want, and we don't get it, we suffer. So how can we move past that? That's sort of another issue for another day, but what I'm talking about today is clearing that conscience and making sure we don't do old behaviors that we used to do. Because I used to do a lot of old bad behaviors. I wasn't intentionally bad. I didn't say this is a bad behavior and I'm going to do it to my wife and she's going to feel bad too. It was more protective. I want to protect myself. And protecting myself meant, how do I keep myself happy? I learned how to keep myself happy through my dysfunctional upbringing. I developed dysfunctional habits, patterns, behaviors that helped me create situations in my life that benefited me. I created these by following these patterns because I didn't know any better. I didn't know how to get what I wanted in a better way, in a healthy way, in a non-controlling way. Emotional abuse is often controlling. When I judged my wife for what she ate and how she looked, it was a way to control her, to try to get her to conform to the way I wanted her. If she ate better, that would make me happier because then she would look better and I would be pleased. Very narcissistic. It was very, you are an extension of me and you will do as I say. Looking back on that now, that is just something I never want to be again. Now I'm like, I want you to be exactly who you want to be so that you are the happiest around me. That makes me feel so much better. There's no stress. There's no suffering, especially no judgment. There's a lot of healing in there because this is telling the world that I'm not here to control you and to micromanage you. I'm here to be with you the way you are. And sometimes we are with people who we don't like the way they are. This email that I got, she was with someone she didn't like who her husband was being. And because of that, she was unhappy. And I think you do a relationship a huge disservice when you stick around and stay unhappy in it. And that's not saying it's your fault. I'm not saying you're to blame for that. But what it does is it allows you to assess, to evaluate, to talk about, to figure out if there's something else that can be done so that you can be happy, so that both of you can be happy. In any relationship, not just romantic, can you be happy in this connection with your friend, with your family member, with your coworker? Can you be happy? Is there a way where this person can be satisfied and you can be satisfied without any type of control that you want someone to change or they want you to change? That's really where the breakdown starts, is when you have a thought that comes in your mind that you say, I want someone to change. So I am going to behave this way so that they change. When we do that, we've already crossed the line. We've already gone beyond what I believe healthy relationship boundaries and parameters are. When you say to yourself in so many words, and we don't normally say this to ourselves, but the thought comes up in so many words of, I want that other person to change. So what I'm going to do is this behavior so that they will change. Or if I do this behavior, I'm hoping they'll change. That's what often happens, is that we hope someone will change if we stay silent for 3 days and withdraw and withhold love and support and attention. If we do that, maybe they'll get the idea that we're upset. And because they care about us so much, they'll change. And they'll change because they love us and they want us to love them back. So it's our method of manipulating love out of them. This is why it crosses the line. When we try to manipulate love and attention from someone else by doing dysfunctional behaviors like that, it creates a toxic environment. So yes, the person who wrote to me, who says, maybe I was the emotional abuser. I think there are things that you may have been doing in your relationship that might be considered toxic, but let me ease your conscience a little bit. If you've come out of a relationship and you feel guilty, you feel bad, you feel like you are the one that caused the problems, and that's why you needed to leave or it needed to end, I need you to remember that when you're not happy and the other person knows you're not happy, that's important too. They need to know you're not happy. But when you're not happy and they know you're not happy, you do the relationship a disservice by staying. Because what are you bringing into the relationship? Not only that, if they know you're unhappy and they're not doing what they can to support your happiness, to support your path to a freer, less suffering life because they love you, then what are they doing instead? Are they in a space of, I want you to change for me, and this is how I am going to control you to do so? Because if they're in that space, you're in a bad situation. You're in a toxic situation. You're in a dysfunctional situation. Pick the adjective of your choice. You are in that negative space that will not get better until one of you changes. And what I see over and over again, and this is where maybe if you're dealing with any type of guilt or you have something on your conscience that you can't get rid of from an old relationship, this is where you can let some of this go, because what I see more often than not, and I'm talking a lot more often than not, is that the more toxic person in a relationship doesn't change ever until the other person does something that provides some sort of loss or threatens some sort of loss. Then the person changes. So what I see over and over and over again, especially in the more toxic relationships, is that the more toxic person doesn't change, the less toxic person or the non-toxic person who's just trying to make the relationship right, just trying to do the right thing, or even just trying to get away from the person, like this person in the email wrote, I just wanted to get away. That is the biggest favor and biggest gift you can do to A, the relationship, and B, the other person, and C, yourself. That is the biggest gift you can give, because someone had to take the step. And sometimes when you're in a situation like this, you give the gift of tough love by leaving because the other person doesn't change. So when you're in a situation where the other person doesn't change and it's been years, I mean, how long do you need until you know the other person won't change? For me, I have a very short window of time. I'm very less tolerant, at least nowadays, because I've learned a lot. I've learned that if they don't change within a certain length of time, they're not going to, because we usually talk about it. If you talk about something with your partner or with a friend or with a family member, and you say that behavior hurts me and it feels like you disrespect me and it doesn't show that you love me, it doesn't show that you support my happiness, what you're doing is hurting me and it doesn't feel good, so it needs to change, or I can't be here. I can't be in a relationship like this. I can't be in this toxic environment. If they come up with, well, you're the one being toxic and I'm trying everything I can and it's not working, or you're not changing. If they come up with anything but, wow, I didn't know you felt that way. I'm so sorry. Let's work on this, or I'll work on myself because I love you and I don't want you to hurt. Anything other than that answer is almost solid proof that they're not willing to look inward. They're not willing to take responsibility. They're not willing to make it their job to do anything about it. They want to push it on you so that you have to deal with it. And the trouble with that is that more compassionate, kind, generous, and caring people will take it on thinking, okay, maybe I just need to be a better person. Maybe I just need to be more giving. Maybe I just need to be more loving, more supportive. And then 5 more years can go by and you realize that nothing at all has changed. And it probably got worse because you feel more drained. So to the person who wrote the email, I'm letting you off the hook, because let's just say that you were in an emotionally abusive relationship, which it sounds like you did. I didn't read the email on the air, but there are many factors of the email that scream bad behavior. So when you have someone that does this bad behavior, that doesn't regard your emotions, your feelings, and is doing it as a way to control you instead of a healthy way where you discuss things like I just said, hey, what you're doing is hurting me. Let's talk about this. Let's figure this out. Great. Let's figure this out. I would love to do that. But instead coerce and manipulate and deceive and betray, all of these other negative aspects. When someone is doing the negative side of trying to change the relationship, that is not healthy. That's a toxic way to change things. Therefore, the person who wrote this email, I'm going to tell you, that sounds like what you needed to do for yourself was leave the situation because your presence enabled the behavior. You weren't the fault. You were just the stimulus. You were there to enable their bad behavior. And in order to get out of that bad behavior, that toxic environment, one of you had to change. Your husband may have thought that you were the toxic one, and that often happens. Often the abuser will call someone else the abuser. The manipulator will call someone else the manipulator. The deceiver will call someone else the deceiver. The betrayer calls the other person the betrayer. It happens to redirect your focus so that you aren't focused on them and you question yourself. And usually someone with the higher morals, higher ethics, higher standards for themselves, usually they're the ones who will reflect more and take it on and say, well, maybe they're right about me. And this is where we get in trouble, because if you do have higher morals, higher standards, higher values, and I'm not trying to compare it to anyone else, I'm just saying if you have high regard for the way you behave in life, then you usually have higher reflectiveness. Usually check in and ask yourself, am I doing things in a good way? Am I showing up in the world in a proper way, in a righteous way? Maybe that's the wrong word, but healthy way. So I better think about it, because that's what we do. We take criticisms and we think about it more and more and more, and we try to improve ourselves. So the people that really want to improve themselves usually stay in toxic environments longer and longer and longer, because we think there's something more we can do to improve ourselves. You need to just be careful about that, because that will be an endless cycle of continuous bad relationships, because we always take it on. We take it on as it's our fault. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to see it as an equal thing. And they take on their responsibilities. You take on your responsibilities. Don't let them lay everything on you. So to the person who wrote this email, let me just say this. Let yourself off the hook. You don't have to take responsibility for his behavior. He does. You wondered if you were the emotionally abusive person. What happens is you're convinced of that often. I'm not saying you weren't. Maybe there were aspects of emotional abuse that you were doing. It's possible. But even if that were the case, you've given both of you the gift of separation, of disconnect. And I'm not saying that's the answer every time, that you should automatically separate and go your separate ways, but sometimes it is. Sometimes you separate and you learn more about yourself than you ever have. And they learn more about themselves than they ever have. And quite often, when there really is love in the relationship, then the other person will reflect and think, maybe I was mistreating her. And you'll reflect, maybe I was mistreating him. That's because there was really love there. We don't want to hurt other people when there's really love there. We want them to be happy. After my divorce was final, my wife reached out to me and wanted to be friends. And I was still being kind of a jerk because I was upset. I didn't want the divorce. I wanted her to change. Those weren't the words that came in my mind, but that's what I wanted. I wanted her to change. I wanted her to change her mind. I wanted her to come back. So she would reach out and be friendly, and I would have something nasty to say. And I finally gave us both the gift of saying, you know what, I'm going to take responsibility for everything I did in the relationship, and I'm sorry for that. And I'm going to wish you well. I'm going to move on, and maybe someday in the future we can meet again, but I'm going to let you go. I didn't use those exact words, but that's what happened. I let her go. And from that point on, it freed us both from the old elements of toxic behavior, from the old toxicity, from the old unhealthy connection that we had. And she was able to move on. She was able to become happy in a relationship that I believe is healthy and serves them both. And I've been able to move on and become happy in a relationship that serves us. And this is what happens, and this is what's supposed to happen, is that you can be in a relationship that has a negative environment, a negative atmosphere, and sometimes you just have to move on so that you can both find better situations. Hopefully the other person heals and is able to get beyond their own behaviors that caused problems in the first place, and hopefully you are too. But when you can't, and you still have these tendrils that go into your past and keep you attached to old behavior, then you're not focused on what you need to do for yourself today. And this is the final thing I want to say to you, is that when you have these negative, awful things on your conscience and you think that you were the bad person, and maybe you were the bad person, maybe you weren't, when you have them holding you back from living a happier, healthier life, having happier, healthier relationships, the focus needs to come back to today, on what you can do today so that you never show up in a way that made you feel bad about yourself. And you never accepted behavior, again, that made you feel bad about yourself. If you were in a relationship that there was behavior that caused you to feel bad about yourself, then that behavior was not supportive of a happy, healthy environment. That behavior was somebody wanting you to change for them, and that's unhealthy. So as we drift out of this segment and get ready for the next one, I want you to be aware that your focus needs to be today. If you keep focusing on what you could have done differently, if you keep focusing on how bad you feel for how you showed up, for how you behaved, for all the possible things that maybe you were back then or maybe you did back then you do a disservice to the people in your life today, and especially you. The best way to get beyond old stuff, old negativity that you are still holding on to, is to make sure you don't expose yourself to that negativity anymore and show up in a way that goes to the extreme opposite of the way you used to be. So the person who wrote this email, she may think that she was emotionally abusive. Okay, use that as your incentive, that you'll never show up that way again so that you can pay it forward. So that you are coming into this world, showing up in this world as someone that is absolutely not ever going to be that person again. I personally, in my own opinion, believe that you were being emotionally abused. And in my experience, 99 out of 100 times that someone's in that type of relationship, they have to become a little bit manipulative, a little bit deceptive. They have to become in a way that they aren't necessarily built in order to get their needs met. So if someone else is being abusive and negative toward them, that the only way to get love or any type of glimmer of happiness or intimacy or bonding is to manipulate back, because that's the only language the other person knows. So sometimes you have to do that. I mean, that's not the solution. I'm not saying you should do that. It's just that's what happens. is that we end up developing bad behaviors around people who are doing bad behaviors because we want our needs met. And when we can't get them met, instead of having a healthy, productive conversation and honoring our boundaries and things like that, if we haven't learned all that yet, then what we do is this other behavior, which is not conducive to a healthy relationship. So then we think, oh, maybe we caused the problems. No, it's usually the other way around. Usually when we are introspective, when we're on a personal growth path, when we believe we're trying to do everything right, and when we don't do something right, we try to fix it. If you're built that way and you suddenly turn manipulative, you suddenly turn deceptive, you're suddenly giving the silent treatment because your needs aren't being met, I want you to find out when that started and why. Figure that out. Like I said, 9 out of 10 times, 99 out of 100 times, you're going to see that the other person was doing things that were unhealthy and that you had to become unhealthy in order to get your needs met. Not the best path to relationship success, I know. But sometimes we have to do what we have to do because we don't have any other means to do anything else. We don't have any other tools or resources. Hopefully, today's episode and the hundreds of others that I've done and the thousands of other resources out there are helping you add more and more emotional tools to your toolbox. We'll be right back. So I'm going to disclose something here that I probably shouldn't because it really makes me accountable, but I really like the idea of accountability. I really like the idea that you put something out there that you tell people about, and now you have to follow through. So this is one of those things. It's a perfect segue, too, because I was just talking about emotional abuse in the last segment, and when you're with an emotional abuser, the best way to get them to change is to say, hey, if you don't start treating me differently, I'm going to do X. I'm going to do something about it. And then you follow through. The worst thing that happens all the time, and the worst thing that you can do, is say, hey, if you don't start treating me differently, or, whatever they're doing, if you don't start doing something differently, then I'm going to do X, and you don't do X, then they realize, oh, there's no accountability. You said you would, but you didn't. So now I can just stay the same from this point on. So in emotionally abusive relationships, accountability is one of the most effective ways to stop whatever patterns of behavior that you don't like. It's not the easiest way, and it involves some scary steps, because that means if I say I'm going to do something, I better do it. You get the idea, where you say you're going to do something and you follow through, because now if you don't, people can say, aha, you're not credible. You're not congruent. When you say you're going to do something, you're not going to do it, so there's really no accountability there whatsoever. That's where I'm putting myself right now. So this show is going to shift a little bit. The Overwhelmed Brain is going to shift a little bit. There's been a lot of episodes on emotional abuse, and it's going to shift because I'm creating another show. I'm creating another show for specifically emotional abuse, because it's so prevalent, because it's such a hot topic. I get emails on it all the time, and it is big enough to have its own show. So I'm coming out with another show called Love and Abuse, and you will see it very shortly. I'm going to create it because I think it needs to be done, and it will help people discern every time they tune into this show, am I going to hear another segment on emotional abuse? I've heard enough segments on emotional abuse. It's that popular. I mean, I get that many emails. It is so huge in the world, unfortunately. It is why the Mean Workbook sells a lot. Every time I see a sale for the Mean Workbook, I feel good knowing that someone is getting good information. They're going to be able to pinpoint exactly what abusive behaviors are going on in their relationship, and also be able to start the healing process, or at least get the first stepping stone in their brain about what to do next. I get letters all the time thanking me for creating that workbook, so I am grateful for that. So I feel good knowing that there's a resource out there, but I also feel bad. We were talking about feeling bad. It's not on my conscience. It's not like I feel guilty. I just feel sympathy. I just feel sympathetic to your plight when you're in a place where you have to get the Mean Workbook and determine what level, if any, but often emotional abuse you're experiencing in your relationship. So it's a mixed feeling. It's important. It has to be out there, in my opinion. It has to be out there. It has to be a tool that people can use for their relationship and even discuss with the people in their life. But I just want to take out the crazy feeling that crazy making can do. Crazy making was one of those terms I'm going to talk about in the new podcast, Love and Abuse. And all the terms that come up that really need to be identified so that you know what's happening. If you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, or if you've ever experienced one, or your friends have ever experienced one, or are experiencing one, it's so vital to know what toxic behavior is in a relationship. And it's not going to be just about emotional abuse. It's also going to be about the different ways we manipulate and deceive, and what we can do to understand it better so that we avoid it, or at least know how to deal with it when it comes up. What are the red flags, and how do I get out of that? What if I'm that person? So there's all kinds of subject matter that I'm going to discuss on that show. So I hope you get a chance to tune in. I don't know when it's coming out. It will be very soon. This is why I'm telling you this on the air, because I want to be accountable. I want people to write to me like a week from now and say, where is it? What are you doing? I want this. So hang in there. This is why the show is going to shift. Anything that has to do with emotional abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, deceptive communication, and any other type of communication that leads to a toxic environment that especially involve any type of relationship, like I said before, romantic, platonic, business, family, all of those relationships that are important in our lives. How can we develop healthier communication, healthier relationships, so that we aren't led down the rabbit hole so deep, so far that we can't find our way out, and we're stuck in there, and now we have no tools because we lost so many on the way, or they were buried by our own inability to deal with someone else's behavior. So I want you to look for that very soon. It's going to be called Love and Abuse. Yes, it has to do with loveandabuse.com, where the Mean Workbook is, and it will be the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, to add on to all the resources that you already get with the workbook as a continuing way to work on yourself, to work on your relationship, to work on how you communicate and building better relationships, and so on and so forth. So keep an ear out for that show. Keep an eye out on your favorite podcast player. You can also go to loveandabuse.com and you'll see the official update for it and any of the latest news for that podcast coming up really soon. And if you want the Mean Workbook, of course, go to loveandabuse.com. Welcome back. I want to give you some practical examples on what you can do to clear your conscience. And this is, like I said, right along the lines of eradicating guilt from your life. You cannot carry guilt for the rest of your life. You cannot do that. I'm telling you, I'm giving you a direct order. Do not carry guilt. Guilt has a purpose. Its purpose is to incentivize you to do something, to either come to terms with the way you behaved and forgive yourself. And you also have to come to a place where you are healed from whatever you're carrying, in the sense that if you did something that you feel guilty about, and it's on your conscience, and every day you think about it, or it expresses itself in some way, you need to move beyond the guilt part of it. Guilt is not a helpful emotion to hang on to. It's a helpful state to be in when you need to learn a lesson, or you need to improve your life in some way, or heal your heart in some way. But guilt is temporary, and it needs to be temporary. And if you've heard my episodes on infidelity, when the infidel, the person who betrays, is actually sorry, actually feels bad, and promises to never do it again, then guilt should only be temporary. Even though some people want the betrayer to feel guilty for the rest of their life, there has to be room for you to be able to go through life, make mistakes, even intentional ones, and when you've learned and you won't make those same mistakes again, to be able to drop the guilt. Now, if you're choosing to make the same mistakes again, if you're choosing to do behavior that you felt guilty about before, then there's a different lesson for you. There's something else going on there, and maybe guilt isn't enough. Maybe guilt isn't enough for you to change. Maybe you need something else, and that might be something you have to address with someone. But overall, whenever you've done something in your life that you feel guilty about, and you want to move forward, and you want to get it off your conscience, first of all, give yourself permission to do so. That is the first step. I give myself permission to get beyond this guilt, to heal beyond this guilt, to let go of the guilt so that I can move forward with my life, so that I can show up as the person I need to show up as, not only for me, but for everyone else, but mostly for me, mostly for everything I need to do for me. Because if I'm carrying guilt, then I carry on the person I was. And you have to ask yourself, am I still that person? That's number 2. Am I still that person? Am I still the same person that would do those things that made me feel guilty? Because if you're not, guilt has no place. Number 3 is you do things that are the opposite of what you did in the past. You do things that are the opposite that made you feel guilty in the first place. For example, when I dropped my cats off in the 90s at the kill shelter, and I felt really guilty, years later, I felt really guilty. I decided to do something about it. I decided to help my wife save a cat. I decided to donate to a cat shelter. I decided that when I got another cat, that I would dedicate my life, my soul, to this animal and make their life as comfortable and wonderful and peaceful as I could. And it doesn't change what I did in the past, but it helps me move past the guilt. So I want you to think of, if you have anything on your mind, anything that continues to plague your consciousness, what can you do that's opposite, that made you feel guilty in the first place, that made it become a thorn in your brain? Maybe it's something you need to say to someone. Maybe, for example, you treated someone bad and you need to apologize to them. That may not be an option. You may not want to do that. I wouldn't recommend the person who wrote that email in the last segment to do that with her ex, because that did sound like an abusive situation. So I would not recommend that she contact him and say, I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I feel like I was emotionally abusive toward you, because that could open up a can of worms, and then she could be right back in that abuse cycle. Or not, I don't know, but I don't think that's a good idea with certain situations, certain relationships in your life. However, what she can do is take any of that guilt and apply it to her own personal growth, apply it to her own self-improvement, and tell herself, you know what? I'm never going to be the person I believed I was back then, and I'm going to work on myself, and whatever I need to do to get past that, to become better than ever, is what I'm going to do. Self-improvement improves everyone else. It improves your relationships. It improves those around you. It improves the world you live in, because you show up differently and your perceptions change. Your thoughts change, because now you are thinking from a healthier place. Because if you show up without dealing with the negativity from your past, not that, we don't all have something that, not all of us, but a lot of us have something that we're dealing with. And it's hard to get over that. It might be hard to heal from it. We're still working on it. We're going to therapy for it. There's all kinds of things that we might be dealing with, but there are some things that we can choose to say, get past, like guilt. So when you have some sort of guilty conscience and you show up in different scenarios with this guilty conscience, you don't bring your full self to the game. You don't give others the benefit of connecting with your truly authentic self, because you are removed from that. You're removed from your authentic self because the guilt can take the forefront. And we have to be careful with that. When we show up and guilt is the motivation behind much of our communication, many of our decisions, then we don't always make the best decisions. So not only is it important for you to get over for your own mental health, but in the future, as you make decisions, if they're based from a place of guilt, then you end up sabotaging your future. The challenge is that we think when we're holding on to the guilt that that's a good thing, that if we don't hold on to it, we won't remember what we did. I guarantee you'll never forget what you did. Now, like I said, it's okay to feel bad. I still feel bad for some of the things that I did in my life. I still feel bad for bringing my cats to the kill shelter. I still feel bad for many things I did in my life. It's not okay to hold on to the guilt. So let me come back to the practical things that you can do. So for example, the person who wrote the email in the last segment, I said, it's probably not a good idea to, talk to him and say, I'm sorry for how I behaved, even though I don't really think that she misbehaved, according to the rest of the email that I got. But for her, not only should she work on improving herself, but maybe in a pay it forward kind of way, she can give to someone else the way she felt she couldn't give to the person she was with. Just like now, I'm in a relationship now where I can give to my girlfriend in a way that I could not give to my wife. And when I was married, I wasn't a good husband. And so I had to come to peace with that. But now, the way I treat my girlfriend today is opposite of the way I treated my wife. And that was important for me to do. Not only because it's the right thing to do in my life, I think that's important that I need to show up in a way that's healthy, that's supportive, that's loving, but it also helps me alleviate any feelings I might have that might still be lingering in there about having a guilty conscience. It's sort of like I felt guilty when I lived in Portland, Oregon. I used to walk by homeless people all the time and not give them any money. I felt really bad. And it wasn't Portland, but that was in Portland as well, but also San Diego. I seem to move to places that have a lot of homeless, but the homeless population is huge in those two areas. So I decided to visit a homeless shelter, and I talked to the person who ran the place, and I asked them questions. I wanted to know what it's like and what they do there. I had a different business back then, and I wanted to give a percentage of my profits because I couldn't get rid of the guilt that I felt of walking by homeless people without handing them money. So I decided to give to organizations that helped homeless people. And when I talked to them and they gave me the information, I can look at that as my contribution to a system that needs help, and also, yes, selfishly alleviate my guilt. Because what else am I going to do if I can't get past the guilt and I see these people every day? I got to do something. So by contributing to something, a bigger cause, a greater cause, it actually helped and did alleviate how I felt. So when I passed them, I knew that they had a place to go that I supported. And you can do this. And I did have another thought, like what if, for example, this person that I talked about that killed her dogs, what if she couldn't get past this guilt? What can she do? And the things I just mentioned already are probably making you think, well, she could give to a dog shelter. She could go volunteer. She could adopt dogs. She could, there's so many things that you can do in that area that may not make the bad feeling go away, but at least give her some meaning to what happened. And sometimes that's all it takes, is that we need to give ourselves some meaning, some purpose, some motivation to do the right thing in the area of whatever we're experiencing, whatever we've experienced in the past. And so I want you to think about, when you have a guilty conscience, what you can do that isn't necessarily designed to take away the bad feeling, because that's just something that you may have to contend with. That's the truth. I have to contend with bad feelings. You have to contend with bad feelings. And if you can get past the bad feelings, even better. But the guilt needs to be treated as a fleeting thing. It needs to be let go. You can't walk around with guilt all the time, because you will show up in a way that's not productive. It's not healthy. It's not a good way to show up unless, and this is my only unless, guilt is the only thing that prevents you from doing bad behavior. That is vital. If you are walking around knowing that you would do bad behavior and guilt is the only thing that prevents you from doing that, then you might have to utilize that guilt. I hate to say it because I don't want you to have guilt, but this is my only caveat. If guilt is preventing you from doing behavior that you know is, quote, bad, however you define bad, then it's probably a good idea to keep it in your life until you find better ways to deal with it, until you can use some other method to work with that. That might be another topic for another show someday, but that is my only caveat. So if you're dealing with guilt and it is preventing you from doing bad behavior, you might have to keep it for a little bit, but work on getting to a place where you can come from a better positive feeling. It's like if you feel guilty about lying to your spouse or lying to your best friend, and you feel so guilty that you'll never do it again, but if you choose to let go of the guilt and that would cause you to lie again, then okay, so you hold on to the guilt. But what can incentivize you even more than guilt? Maybe it's because I care about my friend so much that I won't lie. Hopefully you can get into a better space where it's positively motivated instead of negatively motivated. And so let me give you one final step out of a guilty conscience so that you can move forward through life with a healthier perspective on things. We all have different things that we might feel bad about, that we might be sad about, that might depress us when we think about them. But moving past the guilt, just to burn it into your brain, just so that you can move on. I'm giving you permission, not that you need my permission, but if you've ever needed permission from someone, take it. You can move past this guilt so that you can get into a better space, have a better perspective, have a brighter future, not just for you, for everyone else around you. Because it is difficult to be with someone who's always in a guilty space. Not that you're a difficult person to be around if you're holding guilt. It's just that you have different ideas about the world, different perceptions, like I was saying. But the last thing is just a little bit more introspective than these other questions, which is to ask yourself, if guilt was just eradicated right now, what would take its place? Try that on. Because what comes up for you is going to be important, especially if you have nothing to take its place. Now, you might ask, does it have to be positive? Or can it be negative? It doesn't matter. Whatever comes up for you. If the guilt wasn't there, what would take its place? I'm going to assume that most people listening, something better will take the place of guilt, even if it's negative. But something better will take the place of guilt. If it doesn't, it could be worse. I'm not saying that everyone's going to go through this and have an awesome experience, but what comes up is probably what needs to be worked on, is probably what needs to be explored, maybe meditated on. If guilt wasn't there, what would be? Be with that. Thank you for joining me today. We'll be right back. I'll say some thank yous and my final words after this. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Overwhelmed Brain. You heard me talk about it earlier. The Love and Abuse podcast is coming. But until then, go to loveandabuse.com and check out the Mean Workbook in case your relationship seems a little bit more difficult than it should be. And I want to thank positive reviews from the following reviewers. I found a bunch online. I'd love to be able to read them all, but I'm just going to give you their handles and wish me luck. This one says Suwenchi, Ray Willow, Lathe, Defanzi, South Aussie Girl, I got that one I think, and Dassy Moo, maybe Daisy Moo. Thank you so much for your reviews of the show. I appreciate you. I read every one of them. Thank you for taking the time to do that. Also, I think Mark What Up Homie wrote a review as well. And this was a long review. I'm not going to read it, but when I read it, I'm thinking, is this guy blowing smoke? I don't know if you've ever heard that term. When you blow smoke up someone's, you know what, it's kind of puffing up their ego and making them feel good. Well, I felt really good after I read this review. So I just want to let you know, Mark _ What Up Homie. Thank you very much. If everything you said was true, I am very honored, very grateful. Thank you for that. And I also want to thank members of the Patreon program over at patron.theoverwhelmedbrain.com. Brad, who just joined. Brad, it was good connecting with you. He's one of my clients who just joined, and it's been great talking with you, Brad. Really good to know you, and thank you so much for your support. And Jonathan, thank you so much for joining and for your support as well. And anyone who is in the Patreon program, there are quite a few long-termers in there, and I am very grateful for you. You keep the show going. You and a lot of other people. I'm not discounting anyone here, but the Patreon program is the monetary aspect of the show where anyone who's received value can give back in a way that continues to support the show, continues to bring this show to you. So if you're interested, if you're getting value from this show, go to patron.theoverwhelmedbrain.com. And you not only get to give, but you give to get. You get back the private episodes I've done. You get back all the workbooks, including the Overwhelmed Brain book in PDF format, and some video archives. So there's all kinds of fun stuff to look at over there and listen to. Hope you get a chance to do it. It's another way to give. And let me tell you, I listened to one of the recordings for the safe empowerment system that I'm creating for social anxiety. And this one was by Tasha McLaren at tashamclaren.com. She's an anxiety coach. Really, really good stuff. These experts that I have on this system and that I'll be combining and creating into learning pods and emergency pods to help you through social anxiety moments. These experts are phenomenal. They're really good at what they do. And plus you'll hear yours truly with my own take on anxiety and my own walkthroughs to get you through anxiety moments as well. But I have Tasha and several other experts that are giving their heart and soul to this program, and I am really looking forward to introducing it to the world. I'm supposed to have it done this month. Let's cross our fingers. If you're interested in the social anxiety freedom and ease empowerment system called the Safe Empowerment System, go to theoverwhelmedbrain.com/safe. That URL is going to change. We're going to have its own page soon enough. But for now, go to theoverwhelmedbrain.com/safe, SAFE. And finally, I'd like to thank Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com for some of the music transitions in The Overwhelmed Brain. And my final words have to do with secondary gain. Let's talk about that for a moment. Secondary gain is what you benefit from by having something you don't want. It's sort of like the woman that's depressed who has a husband that dotes on her, serves her, does everything he can for her, and she stays depressed because she likes the attention. And I promise I'm not picking on women. Men do this too. A lot of us can do this because we gain something from it. So her secondary gain in that example would be that if she stops being depressed, her husband stops doting on her. Her husband stops serving her dinner night after night. Her husband stops this and stops attention and the love that she's getting. Secondary gain can be one of those things that keep us in a funky state. And I want you to think about our subject matter today, guilt and guilty conscience and everything that makes us feel bad. This is why I asked that last question before we transitioned into the outro of this show, which is, if guilt wasn't there, what would be? That's a good question. And then when you think about secondary gain, you can ask the question, what do I have to gain by holding on to this guilt? And you'll come up with some answers. And the answers I want you to come up with, I mean, this is if you're experiencing guilt. I assume if you've listened to this far, you have some guilt. You have some sort of guilty conscience, or you just want to learn more about it so you don't get stuck in the old loop of guilt. What do I have to gain by holding on to this guilt? And it may be an answer that, like, the initial answer might be something like, well, if I hold on to it, then it'll be a reminder of who I was, and I never want to forget what I did, or whatever. It might be something like that. And maybe I should just reword the question to this. This will be better. What do I have to gain from others by holding on to this guilt? I think that's a better worded question, because that's going to give you a different answer. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. I want you to think of guilt and a guilty conscience in terms of, what do I have to gain from others if I hold on to this? Because that's going to give you some clarity on how your guilt might be externally motivated. And of course, you can always do the meditation that if no one else was on earth and you were the only one left, would this guilt still plague you? Now, if your guilt has something to do with animals or some other subject matter, that may not be the best scenario. But if it has to do with another person or people, does that change how you feel? That may or may not, but that's an interesting little side quest you can do. But I do like the idea of exploring guilt in all its facets, in all the ways you're attached to it, in all the ways it has a hold of you, that it has a grasp on you, is to explore it in ways by asking yourself questions. If guilt wasn't there, what would be there? What do I have to gain from others by holding on to this guilt? And then you can even explore it further and kind of make up your own questions. Like, what do I have to gain from myself from holding on to this guilt? If guilt were let me just make something up now. If guilt were a shape, what shape would it be? If guilt were a person, what person would that represent? If guilt, I'm just making this stuff up. If guilt was a weather pattern, what weather pattern would it be? And that sounds a little silly, but what you start doing is symbolizing guilt in different ways to hopefully steer you away from how you've been symbolizing it now. Because I'm sure when you think of something that makes you feel guilty, a certain picture comes to mind. Why don't we change that picture? Why don't we make it something more useful, more abstract? Like, what weather pattern would guilt represent? I don't know, a stormy day, clouds and lightning and thunder and rain, and I don't know. That's what I think of. Because that's a lot different than so-and-so's face when I did this. That's a lot different than the last image I saw of my animal or my partner or my dad. Or it's a lot different. Let's start giving it more symbolism, making it more abstract. Because when we start making things more abstract, we can start letting go of all the details that keep us in that funky space. I want to help you get out of that funky space. And it may take some time, and I know that. But do me a favor and just keep an open mind so that you can step into your power. I want you to be firm in your decisions and actions so that you can create the life you want. Always take steps to grow and evolve. You are powerful beyond measure. And above all, and this is something I absolutely know to be true about you, you are amazing.